The day my children gathered in my living room to discuss putting me in a nursing home, I just sat there silently, nodding along. They spoke about me as if I weren't even in the room, debating which facility would be most suitable for someone in my condition. I didn't say a word about the manila folder in my desk containing the mortgage documents to both their homes, properties I now legally owned. Instead, I poured them more tea and listened as they planned my disappearance. My daily routine hadn't changed in years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. At 72, I still move through my immaculate 2-story colonial home with practiced efficiency. Despite my age, I move with purpose, watering my plants, preparing my breakfast, reviewing financial documents at my polished oak desk. My house is filled with photographs spanning decades. My late husband Arthur in his military uniform, our children's graduations, weddings, grandchildren. Every morning, I spend time in my garden where I've won local garden club awards for my roses. The neighbors wave as they pass, and I exchange pleasant greetings. I'm respected in this neighborhood where I've lived for over 40 years. Inside, my calendar is always full. Doctor's appointments, book club, investment group meeting, lunch with my friend Selena. A life full but organized. On my desk sits my framed economics degree and photographs of me receiving an award for 30 years of service at the bank, where I worked as a financial advisor before retirement. That morning, the phone rang. It was my son David, 49, a marketing executive. The conversation was brief, somewhat formal. "Mom, I'll be stopping by later with Melanie," he said, his tone deliberately casual. "We need to discuss something important." I noticed he didn't ask how I was feeling or what I'd been doing. Looking at recent text exchanges with my children, I realized how sporadic and mostly practical they had become. Cancellations for Sunday dinners, requests to watch grandchildren on short notice, brief, birthday wishes. The contrast between the abundant family photos and our limited actual contact was striking. I took my medicine from my organized cabinet, pills for high blood pressure, arthritis. I took them methodically while glancing at a recent medical report, mentioning mild cognitive decline consistent with age, but nothing indicating serious impairment. I frowned slightly, remembering how David had requested to speak with my doctor privately at my last appointment. In my home office, I reviewed my investment portfolio, diversified, substantial. Far from the financially dependent elderly person, my children seemed to perceive me as. My late husband Arthur taught economics at the local university. I worked at the bank, rising to senior financial advisor. Both of us carefully invested over decades while living modestly. I looked at recent bank statements showing significant transactions, 2 major purchases through my holding company named Second Chance Properties, LLC. There were also documents regarding substantial loans to both David and Melanie years ago for their down payments, loans they've never fully repaid despite their comfortable incomes. On a notepad, I had calculated exactly how much I had given each child over the years, including college tuition, wedding costs, and home down payments. The numbers were substantial. Next to these figures were notes about how often each child visits or calls, much smaller numbers. Later, I prepared lunch with my friend Selena. I found myself confiding in her. David rescheduled my doctor's appointment last month without telling me, I mentioned. Said it fit better with his schedule to drive me. "But you still drive yourself everywhere," Selena pointed out. "Melanie's been helping me with my bills," I said, making air quotes. "She took my checkbook to organize it. When I asked for it back, she said she'd handle everything." "Did you tell her you managed the entire bank's investment portfolio?" "For 20 years?" Selena asked. I shook my head. They see gray hair and suddenly forget who I am. We discussed other friends who've lost independence, moved to facilities, had assets controlled by children, lost decision-making power. Selena mentioned her cousin who was pressured to sell her home of 40 years because her children decided it was too much for her to manage. The doorbell rang. A delivery. I signed for a thick envelope marked confidential from a law firm. Later, that afternoon, David and Melanie arrived together, unusual enough that I immediately sensed something planned. They were dressed in business attire, carrying folders. Trailing reluctantly behind them was Thomas, 43, my youngest, a high school art teacher who seemed uncomfortable with whatever was happening. David took charge of the conversation, discussing trivial matters while we settled in the living room. Melanie inspected my house surreptitiously, running a finger over surfaces as if checking for dust, glancing into rooms as if taking inventory. Thomas sat quietly beside me, occasionally squeezing my hand. The siblings exchanged glances during an awkward silence. David cleared his throat. "Mom, we've been talking, and we think it's time to consider options for your future care." Melanie jumped in, speaking quickly with a rehearsed tone. "We found this wonderful retirement community, Evergreen Pines. Very active community, full-time medical staff, no maintenance worries." "I don't need a retirement community," I responded, calmly. "I'm managing just fine here." David's tone became patronizing. "Mom, you forgot to pay your gas bill last month." "No, I disputed it because they overcharged me. They admitted the error," I corrected. Melanie continued as if I hadn't spoken. "The waiting list is long, but I know the director. We could get you in next month if we act quickly. We've already put down a deposit to hold your spot." Thomas spoke. I told them this isn't necessary, Mom, but they insisted we present all the options." The atmosphere grew tense as I realized this wasn't a discussion. It was a notification. They'd already made decisions about my life without my input. "We should sell the house while the market is strong," Melanie added, her real estate instincts showing. "It's too big for you anyway, and the proceeds would cover Evergreen for years." I noticed David glancing repeatedly at the certificate of deposit statements on my side table. I casually moved my cardigan to cover them. "We're just thinking about what's best for you, Mom," David said, his voice smoothly concerned, but his eyes not quite meeting mine. I smiled softly, thinking about the mortgage documents in my desk drawer. "Why don't I make us some tea while I consider what you're suggesting?" I offered, moving toward the kitchen. In the kitchen, alone for a moment, my smile faded. I gripped the counter, steadying myself against a wave of hurt and anger. Then my expression shifted to one of determination as I filled the kettle. Through the doorway, I could hear my children already discussing how to divide my furniture. I returned to the living room with a tray of tea served in my best china, the set, reserved for important occasions. I poured carefully, my hands steady despite my internal turmoil. Thomas noticed me choosing the special cups and gave me a questioning look. I met his eyes briefly with a small, private smile. "As I was saying," Melanie continued, opening a glossy brochure, "Evergreen Pines has weekly bridge clubs, gardening programs. You'd love that, Mom. And the dining options are excellent. They even have financial management services," David added pointedly. "They'd make sure all your bills are paid on time, investments properly managed." I sipped my tea, observing how neither of them had touched the family photo albums I'd deliberately placed on the coffee table. Albums documenting decades of my competent care for them. "I've managed my finances successfully for 50 years, I responded evenly. "Including putting both of you through college without loans." David laughed lightly. Dismissively. "That was different, Mom. Things are more complicated now with digital banking, automatic payments." "I do all my banking online," I stated. "I've been using investment apps for years." Melanie exchanged a glance with David. "Mom, remember last Christmas when you couldn't figure out how to use the new coffee maker? Technology changes so fast." "A coffee maker I didn't need because my perfectly functional one was replaced without asking me," I corrected. Thomas interjected. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Mom's more tech-savvy than either of you realize. She helped me set up my smart classroom last semester. David ignored this, sliding forward a document. We've taken the liberty of drafting a power of attorney, just to make transitions smoother. Transitions to what exactly? I asked, my voice acquiring an edge. Your future care arrangements, Melanie said smoothly. It's routine. Dad had one. Your father was dying of cancer, I said quietly. I am in perfect health. Your blood pressure, David began, is controlled with medication, I finished firmly. Melanie sighed dramatically. Mom, we're trying to help before there's a crisis. Last month when you forgot Lizzie's recital, I didn't forget, I interrupted. You changed the date and only left a voicemail which I didn't receive until after. And the time you left the stove on, David added. I didn't leave it on. The repair service confirmed the knob was faulty. Mom, Melanie said, her patience visibly thinning. These things happen more as you age. We're worried about you living alone in this big house with all these stairs. David leaned forward, his tone becoming authoritative. We've already spoken with Dr. Miller. He agrees that a supervised living situation would be appropriate given your mild cognitive decline. I stiffened. You discussed my private medical information without my consent? He's concerned about early signs of dementia, David continued, ignoring my question. That's not what my diagnosis says, I countered. You might not remember everything the doctor tells you, Melanie suggested condescendingly. Thomas stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. Mom doesn't have dementia. She's sharper than most of my colleagues. Melanie gave Thomas a pitying look. You don't see her daily, Tommy. We've noticed things. Like what? Thomas challenged. Like... David hesitated, then spotted an opportunity. Like that stack of unopened mail on your desk, Mom. Bills piling up? Investment reports, I corrected. And they're not unopened. They're organized by quarter. David reached for the stack, but I moved faster, placing my hand firmly on the papers. Those are private financial documents, I said, my voice hardening. Which is exactly our point, Melanie interjects. You shouldn't have to worry about all this anymore. We can handle everything, David added with false gentleness. Dad would want us to take care of you, Mom. It was this invocation of my late husband that became the final straw. I put down my teacup with deliberate control, though. My hand trembled slightly. Arthur, I said, emphasizing my husband's name, trusted me completely with our finances for 45 years. He respected my intelligence and capability until his last breath. I stood, suddenly feeling taller than my 5 feet 4 inches. I think this meeting is over. Mom, be reasonable, David protested. We've already paid the deposit. The administrator is expecting you next week for a tour. I won't be going, I said with finality. Melanie's friendly facade cracked. This is exactly why we're concerned. You're being stubborn and irrational. Enough, Mel, Thomas interjected. Stay out of this, Thomas, David snapped. You're not the one who'll have to deal with the consequences. You live 3 hours away. Because you two pushed me out of every decision about Mom, Thomas retorted. Melanie turned to me, her voice taking on a threatening tone. Mom, if you don't cooperate, we might need to discuss more formal arrangements, for your own good. Are you threatening me with a competency hearing? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. If necessary, David said firmly. Your safety is our priority. Thomas exploded. This is elder abuse. You're manipulating the situation to gain control of Mom's assets. How dare you? Melanie gasped theatrically. We're trying to protect her. From what? Thomas demanded. Her own independence? Her own money? The argument escalated, with David and Melanie on one side, Thomas on the other. I watched silently, as my children fought over my future as if I weren't present. Finally, I spoke, my voice cutting through the chaos with quiet authority. "I'd like you all to leave now." David and Melanie stared at me in shock. "Mom?" they began simultaneously. "Now," I repeated, walking deliberately to the front door and opening it. As my children filed out, Melanie turned back. "We're doing this because we love you, Mom. You'll understand eventually." When they'd gone, Thomas lingered on the porch. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I had no idea they were planning this." "It's not your fault," I assured him, though my voice was weary. "I'll fight them on this," Thomas promised. "They can't force you into a home." I touched his cheek gently. "Don't worry about me. I'm more capable than they realize." After Thomas left, I closed the door and leaned against it, finally allowing myself to feel the full impact of what just happened. My breathing became uneven as tears threatened. I walked slowly to Arthur's photograph. "They think I'm incapable." "Arthur," I whispered. "Our own children see me as nothing but a burden to manage, an asset to control." I moved to my desk, unlocked the drawer, and removed the manila folder labeled Second Chance Properties. Inside were mortgage documents for both David and Melanie's homes, now legally owned by my holding company. I had purchased the mortgages as a safety net for my children, intending it as a surprise gift to forgive the debt upon my passing. Now, I stared at the papers, a new idea forming. "They want to control my life," I murmured, a steely determination replacing my hurt. "Perhaps it's time they learned who really holds the power in this family." I picked up the phone and dialed. "Trisha, it's Edna. I need to consult with you about executing Plan B for those properties we discussed." "Yes, immediately. My children have just made a rather serious miscalculation." That night, sleep evaded me. I sat in my rocking chair by the bedroom window, staring out at the neighborhood I've called home for 4 decades. The same neighborhood where I raised my family, where Arthur had built the treehouse that still stands, in the backyard oak, where generations of memories are embedded in every corner. I rocked slowly, trying to pinpoint when things changed. When my children stopped seeing me as a person with agency and began viewing me as a problem to manage. Was it after Arthur died 5 years ago, when I turned 70? Or had it been happening so gradually I hadn't noticed until today's ambush? I retrieved a leather-bound journal from my nightstand. Inside were detailed notes I'd kept since noticing subtle changes in my children's behavior. David insisting on driving me to appointments, Melanie organizing my kitchen without permission, both of them exchanging glances when I mentioned future travel plans. Small moments that seemed insignificant individually, but formed a pattern when viewed together. I flipped through old photo albums, tracing my finger over images of David and Melanie as children. David proudly showing off his first savings account passbook that I'd helped him open. Melanie beaming beside her first car that I'd co-signed for. I had taught them financial literacy from an early age, helped them navigate student loans, advised them on their first home purchases. When did they forget who I am? I whispered too. The empty room. Morning found me at my desk, reviewing my financial documents with fresh eyes. My substantial investment portfolio, the rental properties I manage, my retirement accounts, all meticulously maintained. I pulled up my banking app, confirming recent transactions, including the purchase of David and Melanie's mortgages through my holding company. The phone rang. It was Melanie, her voice artificially bright. "Good morning, Mom. David and I thought we'd come by today to continue our discussion. The Evergreen administrator is available for a tour at 11. "I won't be home," I replied calmly. A pause. "Where will you be?" she asked, surprise evident in her voice. "I have a meeting with my financial advisor," I said truthfully. "Oh." Another pause. "Would you like us to reschedule the tour for tomorrow?" "I've already told you I'm not interested in Evergreen Pines." Melanie's tone shifted to one of forced patience. Mom, we're trying to help you. This resistance isn't healthy. Neither is trying to force me into a facility I don't need or want, I countered. We'll discuss this later, Melanie said firmly. David and I will stop by this evening. After hanging up, I sat perfectly still, processing my daughter's persistence. Then I picked up the phone again and made several calls. To my attorney, to my investment advisor, and finally to my friend Selena. Later, I met Selena at our favorite cafe, a quiet corner spot where we've shared countless conversations over the years. She listened intently as I recounted yesterday's confrontation. They actually brought a power of attorney document? She asked, incredulous. I nodded. Already filled out with their names. Classic elder financial abuse setup, Selena muttered. She'd worked as a social worker before retirement and recognizes the pattern. What will you do? I stirred my tea thoughtfully. I'm considering my options. Does this have anything to do with those mortgages you purchased? Selena asked shrewdly. Small smile crossed my face. I originally bought them as security for David and Melanie. A safety net I could provide without them feeling like they were taking charity. And now? Now I'm thinking they might serve a different purpose. A lesson, perhaps. Selena leaned forward. Be careful, Edna. This could fracture your family permanently. That's what I'm struggling with, I admitted. Is standing up for myself worth potentially losing my relationship with my children? Is having a relationship where you're disrespected and controlled really worth preserving? Selena countered gently. I fell silent, considering this uncomfortable question. That afternoon, I sat in the office of my longtime attorney, Tricia Harrington. A shrewd woman in her 60s, she has been my legal advisor since Arthur's passing, based Hawaii. On what you've described, we should update your advance directives immediately, Tricia advised, typing notes. Name Thomas as your healthcare proxy instead of David. We'll create a living will that explicitly states your wishes regarding long-term care facilities. And the mortgages? I asked. Tricia removed her glasses, considering. Legally, you're within your rights to enforce those contracts however you see fit. Your holding company can certainly adjust terms, initiate reviews, even call in the loans with proper notice. I don't want to make them homeless, I clarified. I just want them to respect my autonomy. Sometimes people only understand power when it affects them directly, Tricia observed. A small demonstration might be educational without causing lasting harm. We discussed options, with Tricia outlining potential approaches ranging from gentle to severe. I listened attentively, asking clarifying questions. By the end of our meeting, we'd developed a graduated response plan. Are you sure you want to do this? Tricia asked as we finalized the documents. No, I admitted. But I'm even less sure I want to spend my remaining years being treated like an incompetent child. Driving home, I passed Evergreen Pines, the retirement facility my children had chosen for me. On impulse, I turned into the driveway and parked. The building was pleasant enough. Modern architecture, well-maintained grounds, residents visible through large windows participating in what appeared to be a group exercise class. I watched for several minutes observing the residents. Some appeared engaged and content, others vacant and withdrawn. It's not a terrible place, I acknowledged. But it's not my home. Can I help you? A staff member asked, approaching my car. Just looking, I replied. My children want me to move. Here, the young woman smiled. We have a lovely community. Would you like a tour? Do you have many residents who don't want to be here? I asked instead. The woman's smile faltered momentarily. Adjustment periods vary, she said diplomatically. I nodded, understanding what isn't being said. Thank you, but I won't need that. Tour! As I drove away, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. The hurt and shock from yesterday had crystallized into something harder, more resolute. I've spent a lifetime being underestimated, First as a young woman in the male-dominated financial industry, later as a widow presumed helpless without her husband. I had overcome those prejudices with dignity and competence. I would do so again. Pulling into my driveway, I noticed David's car already parked out front. Both he and Melanie were waiting on my porch, folders in hand, expressions determined. Round 2 of their campaign to control my life. I took a deep breath, feeling remarkably calm. I was done with simply reacting to their plans. It was time to implement my own. I parked my car and approached my porch with measured steps. David and Melanie stood as I arrived, their expressions a practiced mix of concern and determination. "Where have you been?" David asked, checking his watch pointedly. "We've been waiting almost an hour." "I had appointments," I replied simply, unlocking my door. "We were worried," Melanie added. "You didn't answer your cell phone." It was on silent. During my meetings. I entered my home, not holding the door for them, but they followed regardless. Inside, I noticed they'd made themselves comfortable. Melanie's laptop open on the coffee table, David's briefcase spilling papers onto my sofa. They'd brought reinforcements too, glossy Evergreen Pines brochures, financial worksheets, and what appeared to be a revised power of attorney document. "We brought dinner." Melanie gestured to take out containers on the dining table. "We thought we could eat while we talk through the Evergreen options." I set down my purse. "I've already eaten with Selena." David frowned. "Mom, we're trying to have a family discussion about important matters." "Which is why I invited someone to join us," I responded, just as the doorbell rang. I opened the door to Thomas, who stepped inside with a supportive smile. Behind him was Trisha Harrington, my attorney, elegant in a tailored suit despite the evening hour. "What's going on?" Melanie asked, eyes narrowing at Trisha. "Why is your lawyer here?" "Because we're discussing legal matters that affect my future," I said calmly. "I thought it appropriate to have counsel present." An uncomfortable silence fell as everyone settled in the living room. David and Melanie exchanged wary glances. "Let's get straight to the point," I began, my voice steady. "You want me to sell my home and move to Evergreen Pines against my wishes. You've attempted to secure power of attorney over my affairs without my informed consent. You've discussed my private medical information with doctors without permission." "We're trying to help," David started. "No," I cut him off firmly. "You're trying to control me. There's a difference." I removed a folder from my purse and placed it on the coffee table. "This is a neuropsychological evaluation I completed this morning with Dr. Barrett, a specialist in geriatric cognition. It confirms what I already know. I am mentally competent with no significant cognitive impairment." Melanie began to protest, but I continued. "I've also updated my advance directives." I slid another document forward. "Thomas is now my healthcare proxy, and I've explicitly stated my wish to remain in my home as long as medically feasible, with in-home care if necessary." "You changed your healthcare proxy?" David asked, visibly offended. "After all I've done managing your appointments?" "Managing them without consulting me," I corrected. "Scheduling them at your convenience, not mine." "This is ridiculous," Melanie interjects. "You're being stubborn and putting yourself at risk." Trisha spoke for the first time, her tone professionally detached. "Mrs. Matthews has been evaluated and found fully capable of making her own decisions. Any attempts to override her wishes could be considered elder abuse under state law." "Elder abuse?" David scoffed. "We're trying to protect her." "From what?" Thomas asked quietly. "Her independence? Her right to live where she chooses?" Melanie turned to me, her expression hardening. "Mom, if you won't be reasonable, we might need to take more formal steps, for your own protection. It's this thinly veiled threat, the second in as many days, that crystallized something in me. A lifetime of accommodating others, of prioritizing family harmony over my own needs, of swallowing hurt rather than causing conflict. All of it suddenly felt like a weight I could no longer bear. "Formal steps," I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. "Like having me declared incompetent? Forcing me into guardianship?" "If necessary," David confirmed, his tone suggesting he's being brave rather than cruel. I looked at my eldest son, really, looked at him. His expensive watch, his manicured nails, the entitled set of his shoulders. He had my eyes, but none of my compassion. I turned to Melanie, noting my daughter's impatient expression, the way she checked her phone even during this critical conversation. These were my children, yet in this moment, they felt like strangers wearing familiar faces. "I have something to show you," I said, opening my desk drawer and removing the manila folder labeled Second Chance Properties. I laid out 2 sets of documents, sliding one toward David, the other toward Melanie. "What's this?" David asked, scanning the papers. "Mortgage documents," I replied. "For your homes." Melanie frowned, confused. "We know what our mortgages look like, Mom. But you may not be aware who holds them," I continued calmly. 3 months ago, I established Second Chance Properties, LLC. Through this company, I purchased both your mortgages from your original lenders. The room fell completely silent. David's face drained of color as he examined the documents more carefully. Melanie's mouth opened slightly in shock. "You bought our mortgages?" David finally managed. "That's not possible." "Entirely possible and completely legal," Tricia confirmed. "Secondary mortgage markets are quite active these days." "Why would you do this?" Melanie asked, her voice suddenly small. "Originally as a gift," I explained. "I planned to forgive the balances eventually as part of your inheritance." "And now?" David asked cautiously. I met his gaze without flinching. "Now I'm considering my options as your creditor." "This is some kind of joke," David said, but his voice lacked conviction. "It's not," I assured him. "Second Chance Properties now holds legal rights to both your mortgages. As sole owner of the company, I can adjust terms, require property inspections, even accelerate payment schedules if certain conditions are met." "You can't do this," Melanie protested. "Actually, she can," Tricia interjects. "Just as you can try to force your mother into a retirement home, legally speaking. Both actions are permitted, though one might question the ethics of either approach." Thomas watched the exchange silently, eyes wide with disbelief. He hadn't known about the mortgages either. I took a deep breath. "I don't want to be your adversary. I want to be your mother, respected, not managed, included, not controlled." "So this is blackmail," David said bitterly. "Do what you want, or you'll foreclose on our homes." "This is a reality check," I corrected him. "You've forgotten who I am, who I've always been. I managed our family finances while your father taught economics. I advised clients on multi-million-dollar OG investments for 30 years. I raised you to be independent, yet you can't extend me the same courtesy." I closed the folder deliberately. "I'm not moving to Evergreen Pines. I'm not signing over power of attorney. I'm not selling my home. And if you persist in trying to override my wishes, there will be consequences." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of this fundamental shift in family dynamics. I had done what seemed impossible just yesterday. I had reclaimed my power and established boundaries that cannot be ignored. The decisive moment had arrived, and with it, the clear understanding that nothing between us would ever be the same again. The living room felt charged with tension, like the air before a thunderstorm. David recovered first, his shock hardening into anger. "This is manipulation, pure and simple," he said, pushing the mortgage documents away as if they're contaminated. "Using financial leverage to control us, I never thought you'd stoop so low." "Interesting perspective," I replied evenly. "Particularly coming from someone who just threatened to have his mother declared legally incompetent." Melanie's approach shifted to emotional appeal. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "we're your children. How could you do this? To us? After everything we've done for you?" "What exactly have you done for me, Melanie?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Besides rearranging my kitchen without permission and criticizing how I live in my own home?" "We worry about you," Melanie exclaimed. "We call, we visit." "You call to check if I've taken my medication or paid my bills," I interrupted. "You visit to inspect my home for imaginary hazards. That's not support, that's surveillance." David stood abruptly, pacing the room. "This is outrageous. You ambushed us with legal counsel present, revealed you've been secretly acquiring financial control over our homes. Much like you ambushed me yesterday with retirement brochures and power of attorney documents," I pointed out. Thomas, who had been observing silently, finally spoke. "The difference is that Mom isn't trying to force you out of your homes. She's asking to be allowed to stay in hers." "Stay out of this, Thomas," David snapped. "You've always enabled her independence when she clearly needs more supervision." "She's our mother, not a child," Thomas retorted. "And the only thing she clearly needs is respect." David took a deep breath, visibly trying to regain control of the situation. He sat down across from me, adopting the same expression he likely uses in business negotiations. "Let's be practical about this," he began, his tone forcibly reasonable. "You've made your point, Mom. Message received, but surely we can find a compromise that addresses everyone's concerns." "I'm listening," I said, folding my hands in my lap. "You want to stay in your home? Fine. We can arrange for a live-in caretaker instead of Evergreen Pines. Someone to help with cooking, cleaning, medications. That would address our safety concerns while allowing you to keep your independence." I tilted my head. "There's nothing wrong with my cooking or cleaning abilities, and I've managed my medications successfully for decades. But having someone here would give us peace of mind," Melanie added eagerly, sensing a potential opening. "We wouldn't worry so much." "Your worry is not my responsibility," I said firmly. "I'm not rearranging my life to manage your anxiety." David's facade of reasonableness slipped. "So that's it? You either get exactly what you want, or you'll what? Foreclose on our houses? Throw your own grandchildren out on the street?" "I never said anything about foreclosure," I corrected him, "though it's telling that your mind went there immediately." "What are you saying then?" Melanie demanded. "I'm saying that my continued goodwill as your creditor depends on your respect for my autonomy going forward." "This is emotional blackmail," David declared, his voice rising. "And frankly, it only proves our point about your judgment becoming impaired. No reasonable person would weaponize their children's financial security like this. No reasonable children would try to force their capable mother into a nursing home against her will," Thomas countered. Melanie turned to Trisha, appealing to her professionally. "Surely you can see this isn't right? Using financial pressure to manipulate family relationships?" "My role isn't to judge the family dynamics," Trisha responded carefully. "I'm here to ensure Mrs. Matthews' legal interests are protected, but I would note that financial leverage exists on both sides of this equation." David turned to me, his expression darkening. "You've changed, Mom. Dad would be ashamed of this behavior." It was a calculated blow, invoking Arthur's memory to hurt me. I felt the sting but didn't flinch. "Your father believed in dignity and self-determination," I said quietly. "He would be ashamed of children who can't recognize those same values in their mother." David stood again, gathering his papers with jerky movements. "This meeting is over. We need time to consider our options." "Legal options?" I asked pointedly. "All options," he replied coldly. "You've made this adversarial, not us." Melanie followed David's lead, collecting her things. "I can't believe you've done this," she said, her voice thick with what sounded like genuine hurt. "We were trying to help you, and you've turned it into this." I believe you think you were helping, I acknowledged, softening slightly. But help that dismisses my agency isn't help at all. David paused at the door. We'll be consulting our own attorney about these mortgage documents. If there's any irregularity in how you acquired them, there isn't, Tricia interjects smoothly. Every transaction was properly executed and recorded. We'll see, David muttered. Then to me, this isn't over. After they left, slamming the door behind them, a heavy silence fell over the living room. Thomas moved to sit beside me on the sofa. That was intense, he said finally. Are you okay? I released a long, controlled breath. Not really. I had no idea about the mortgages, Thomas admitted. That was quite a power move, Mom. It wasn't meant to be, I said, suddenly feeling tired. I bought them thinking I could help if they ever faced financial hardship. Insurance, really. I never imagined I'd need to use them as leverage against my own children. Tricia began gathering her documents. For what it's worth, I think they'll calm down once the shock wears off. This forced them to see you differently. That's uncomfortable, but necessary. After Tricia left, Thomas helped me clear away the untouched takeout food. We worked in companionable silence until Thomas asked, "What happens now?" I looked around my home, the home where I raised my family, where I mourned my husband, where I built a life of quiet dignity and independence. Now we wait, I said simply. The ball is in their court. But as I stood in my kitchen, watching Thomas through the window as he left, I felt a strange mixture of victory and loss. I had stood my ground, made my position clear, yet the cost was already becoming apparent. The family photos on my walls suddenly seemed like artifacts from another time, a time before mortgages became weapons and love became conditional. I picked up my phone and saw 3 missed calls from Selena. For now, at least, I didn't have the energy to recount what happened. Instead, I walked through my house, turning out lights, moving with the familiar certainty of someone who knows every corner of their domain. This is my home, I whispered to myself, and I won't be pushed out of it. The day after the confrontation, I woke early and made my way to the attic. The space is well organized, with labeled boxes lining wooden shelves that Arthur had built decades ago. I found what I was looking for in a corner, a large trunk containing our family archives. Inside were photo albums, journals, and financial records dating back to the early years of my marriage. I pulled out a weathered ledger book, running my finger down columns of my neat handwriting, household accounts from 1975, the year David was born. As sunlight filtered through the small attic window, I sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by the physical evidence of my family's history. I found myself drawn to Arthur's old briefcase, still containing papers from his university office. Among them was a letter he'd written but never sent to his department chair, expressing frustration about being passed over for promotion despite his qualifications. "We'll manage," I had told him when he showed me the draft. "I can pick up more clients at the bank." And I had. Working extra hours while caring for an infant, I'd brought in enough additional income to compensate for Arthur's stalled academic career. Later, when he was finally promoted, my additional earnings had paid for our first investment property, the foundation of the financial security we'd eventually build. Deeper in the trunk, I found a folder containing my own career documents, job, offers I'd declined, including one from a prestigious investment firm in Chicago. The position would have doubled my salary but required relocation, disrupting Arthur's tenure track and David's elementary school routine. Without regret, I had chosen family stability over professional advancement. When Melanie was born, 3 years later, I had shifted to part-time work temporarily, carefully calculating how to balance childcare costs against reduced income. By the time Thomas arrived, I had mastered the financial high-wire act of raising 3 children on a professor's salary supplemented by my banking income. A small velvet box contains the diamond earrings Arthur had given me for our 20th anniversary. "You deserve so much more," he had said, knowing I'd redirected my bonus that year toward David's college fund. "I have everything I need," I had replied truthfully. I found David's first loan application for graduate school, with my signature as co-signer. Similar documents exist for Melanie's first car, Thomas's art school tuition. Throughout their young adult years, I had provided the financial backstop that allowed my children to pursue their ambitions without crippling debt. I moved to a more recent box, containing documents from the last decade. Here, the narrative shifts. Arthur's medical records detail his cancer diagnosis, the aggressive treatments, the mounting bills that our insurance didn't fully cover. I found my retirement account statements from that period, showing substantial withdrawals to pay for experimental treatments not covered by insurance. "Don't deplete your savings for me," Arthur had protested from his hospital bed. "What else is it for if not this?" I had countered. After Arthur's death, I had methodically rebuilt my finances, leveraging my professional expertise to make smart investments despite my grief. The documents show a clear trajectory: property acquisitions, stock portfolio diversification, careful tax planning, all executed with the precision of someone who had spent a career advising others on wealth management. I found the first emails regarding David and Melanie's mortgage challenges, sent during the financial crisis when they'd both faced possible foreclosure due to adjustable rate resets. At the time, I had offered direct financial assistance. "We'll figure it out ourselves, Mom," David had insisted. "We're not taking your money." Pride, I realized now. Too proud to accept help openly, but struggling nonetheless. That's when I had first conceived the idea of purchasing their mortgages through an intermediary, helping without their knowledge to preserve their sense of independence. The final documents were more troubling. Notes from conversations with David and Melanie over the past year showing a gradual increase in their controlling behaviors. A doctor's appointment David had rescheduled without telling me. A house repair Melanie had insisted on arranging, despite my preference for a different contractor. Most disturbing was an email exchange between David and Melanie that Thomas had forwarded to me just a month ago. "Mom seems more forgetful lately. She couldn't remember the name of Dad's colleague when we were talking about the university," David had written. "I've noticed too, and that house is way too big for her to manage. The property taxes alone are ridiculous. If she'd sell now while the market is hot, she could move somewhere more appropriate and have plenty left for care when she needs it," Melanie had replied. "We should start having the conversation now, before there's a crisis. It would be better if she came to the decision herself, but we need to be prepared if she resists." The timestamp on this exchange predated the first mention of Evergreen Pines to me by several weeks. They had been planning this move for some time. I closed the folder, emotions washing over me in complex waves. I understood now the gradual erosion of my authority in my children's eyes. Not a sudden development, but a slow reframing of my identity from capable matriarch to vulnerable elder. The irony struck me forcefully. Throughout their lives, I had carefully respected my children's autonomy, stepping back to let them make their own decisions even when I could see potential pitfalls. I had valued their independence as part of their dignity as adults, yet they couldn't extend the same respect to me. I packed away the documents, keeping out only a few photographs and Arthur's unfinished letter. As I descended from the attic, I carried with me a clearer understanding of how we had arrived at this painful impasse, and a strengthened resolve to correct the misconceptions my children have about who I truly am, and always have been. 3 days after our confrontation, I received an unexpected call from Patricia, David's wife. Her tone was hushed, almost secretive. "Edna, I thought you should know. David's meeting with a lawyer today. An elder law specialist named Don Williams." "Thank you for telling me," I responded, unsurprised but grateful for the information. After hanging up, I called Tricia. "They're consulting an elder law attorney. What should I expect?" Tricia sighed. "Likely exploring guardianship options, challenging Your competency evaluation. Maybe investigating the mortgage purchases for any procedural irregularities. Will they find any? I asked, suddenly concerned. Not a chance, Tricia assured me. We did everything by the book. I spent the afternoon reviewing my financial records again, ensuring everything was impeccably organized. If there was to be a legal battle, I would be prepared. That evening, Melanie arrived at my door unannounced, holding a bouquet of lilies, my favorite flowers. Mom, we've been thinking about everything you said, she began when I invited her in. You're right. We should have respected your wishes about staying in your home. I regarded my daughter with cautious surprise. That's quite a change of perspective in just a few days. Melanie sat on the sofa, arranging her expression into one of contrite understanding. David and I talked a lot about it. We were coming from a place of concern, but we handled it badly. We should have asked what you wanted instead of telling you what we thought was best. Yes, you should have, I agreed, my tone neutral as I sat across from her. We'd like to start over, Melanie continued. No more talk of evergreen pines or selling the house. This is your home, and you have every right to stay here as long as you want. I studied my daughter's face, looking for signs of the calculating expression I'd seen during our last meeting. And the power of attorney documents? Completely your decision, Melanie assured me quickly. We overstepped. What about my alleged cognitive decline? I pressed, not quite ready to accept this sudden reversal. Melanie had the grace to look embarrassed. We were worried, that's all. But if the specialist says you're fine, then you're fine. We trust that. The conversation continued with Melanie, suggesting small compromises, a landscaping service for the yard work, so you don't have to worry about it, a weekly cleaning service, just for the heavy lifting, a meal delivery option for nights you don't feel like cooking. I recognized these suggestions for what they were. Attempts to insert external services that could eventually report back to my children. I declined each one politely but firmly. Melanie prepared to leave. She paused at the door. Oh, and we're having a family dinner this Sunday. Everyone will be there. David's family, Thomas is driving in, the grandkids. Would you join us? It would mean a lot. I considered the invitation, sensing a strategy, but unwilling to reject an opportunity to see my grandchildren. I'll be there. I agreed. Should I bring anything? Just yourself, Melanie said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. We'll take care of everything. After Melanie left, I called Selena. The campaign has begun, I said when my friend answered. Flowers, apologies, and invitations to family dinner. That was fast, Selena remarked. Do you think they're sincere? I glanced at the lilies, already arranged in a vase. About as sincere as a politician before an election. They want something. The question is, Selena responded thoughtfully, what are they really after? Control, I said simply. They've just changed tactics for obtaining it. The next morning, I decided to do some reconnaissance of my own. I drove to Thomas's apartment and filled him in on Melanie's visit. It sounds suspicious, he agreed, but I don't know what they're planning. Can you find out? I asked. They might talk more freely with you. Thomas nodded reluctantly. I'll call David today, see what I can learn. Later that evening, Thomas called back. I spoke with David. They met with an elder law attorney who essentially told them they don't have grounds for guardianship given your competency evaluation. So they're backing off? I asked, skeptical. Not exactly, Thomas replied. The attorney suggested they rebuild the relationship first, document any concerning behaviors, and gradually introduce helpers to create dependency. A long game, I mused. Exactly. The Sunday dinner is apparently part of this. They've invited Dr. Reynolds, Dad's old colleague. He's a neurologist. Let me guess. They're hoping he'll notice cognitive issues during casual conversation. There's more, Thomas continued. David mentioned they're planning memory games after dinner, supposedly, for the grandchildren. I couldn't help but laugh at the transparency of their scheme. So I'm to be examined without consent, tested without warning, all while being told it's for my own good. You could refuse to go, Thomas suggested. No, I said after a moment's consideration. Refusing plays into their narrative that I'm becoming difficult, paranoid. Besides, perhaps it's time they learned exactly who they're dealing with. The next day, I invited Selena and Thomas for breakfast to strategize. Over coffee and homemade scones, I outlined my approach for the dinner. Are you sure about this? Selena asked, concerned. It could backfire. I'm done being defensive, I explained. If they want to test my cognitive abilities, I'll give them a demonstration they won't forget. After they left, I spent several hours preparing. I reviewed family photo albums, noting specific dates and details of vacations, celebrations, and milestones that might come up in conversation. I refreshed my knowledge of Dr. Reynolds' research and publications. I even practiced several memory exercises typically used in cognitive assessments, ensuring I understood the patterns and expectations. By the time Sunday arrived, I felt ready for whatever they might have planned. I asked Thomas to drive me, not wanting to arrive alone and vulnerable. You seem remarkably calm, he observed as we pulled into David's driveway. I smiled, feeling a new sense of confidence. I've spent my life underestimated, Thomas. As a woman in finance, as a widow, I've always proven myself capable. This is no different. Still, be careful, he cautioned. They've had days to prepare. This. So have I replied, straightening my shoulders as we approached the door. And unlike them, I have nothing to hide. David's home was picture perfect when I arrived with Thomas. Tasteful decorations, delicious aromas from the kitchen, cheerful music playing softly. My grandchildren rushed to greet me with genuine enthusiasm, a bright spot in what I knew would be a challenging evening. Mom, you look wonderful, David said, embracing me with exaggerated warmth. Come in, everyone's excited to see you. The living room was indeed full. David's wife Patricia and their two teenagers, Melanie's husband Don and their daughter Lizzie, several family friends, and, as Thomas predicted, Dr. Reynolds, Arthur's former colleague, now retired from neurology. Edna, it's been too long. The doctor greeted me with a handshake that felt suspiciously like he was checking my grip strength. Indeed, Richard, I replied, using his first name deliberately. How's the book coming? Still working on that research about early cognitive markers? A flicker of surprise crossed his face. He had mentioned the book project once, nearly 8 months ago, at a university function. You remember that? I remember most things, I said pleasantly. Particularly conversations about brain health. Fascinating subject. I moved through the room with deliberate ease, engaging in detailed conversations, asking specific questions about people's lives that referenced information from previous interactions. With each exchange, I could sense David and Melanie watching, their expressions growing increasingly perplexed. During dinner, the conversation was carefully steered toward innocent-seeming topics that actually tested memory and cognitive function. Remember that vacation to Maine when David was 10? Melanie asked casually. What was the name of that little restaurant we loved? Hammond's Harbor House, I replied without hesitation. You ordered lobster for the first time and cried when you saw it with the shell on. Your father had to bribe you with ice cream to try it. And Mom, David interjects, wasn't there a problem with our cabin? The first one had a leak in the roof, I confirmed, buttering a roll. We moved to Unit 12 instead of 7. The manager gave us a discount and free breakfast for the inconvenience. As the dinner progressed, the attempts grew more transparent. I handled each one with calm precision, neither defensive nor boastful, simply matter of fact. I noticed Dr. Reynolds watching me with growing professional interest rather than concern. After the meal, we moved to the living room for coffee and dessert. David announced it was time for some fun family games and brought out a box of memory-focused activities clearly purchased for the occasion. "Before we start," I said, setting down my coffee cup, "I'd like a moment to discuss something important." The room quieted, tension suddenly palpable. "I want to thank you all for this lovely evening," I began. "It's not often we have so many people we care about in one room, which makes this the perfect opportunity to clear up some misconceptions." David shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, maybe we should just enjoy—" "I've brought something for everyone," I continued, opening the folder Selena had given me before dinner. I removed several documents and began distributing them around the room. "What are these?" Melanie asked, looking down at the paper in her hand. "Financial statements," I explained calmly. "My complete portfolio review from last quarter, my credit report, the results of my neuropsychological evaluation, and a property assessment of my home." I handed the final document to Dr. Reynolds. "And this is the opinion letter from Dr. Barrett, a geriatric specialist at University Medical Center, confirming my cognitive function is within the normal range for my age, with no indicators of significant decline." The room was utterly silent now. David and Melanie looked stricken. "I'm aware," I continued, my voice clear and steady, "that concerns have been raised about my ability to manage my affairs. I thought it best to address these concerns transparently with everyone present." I turned to Dr. Reynolds. "Richard, as a neurologist, I'd welcome your professional assessment of Dr. Barrett's findings. You'll note the extensive testing protocols used." Dr. Reynolds scanned the document, his expression shifting from curiosity to professional respect. "This is quite thorough. The MMSE score is excellent, and the more sensitive tests show no areas of concern." I nodded, then addressed the wider group. "I've lived independently and managed complex financial matters my entire adult life. I've helped many of you with financial advice over the years. That capability hasn't changed." I looked directly at David and Melanie. "What has changed is how some people perceive me. Age brings wisdom, but unfortunately it can also bring assumptions from others, even those closest to us." David attempted to recover. "Mom, nobody here is questioning—" "Please," I interrupted gently. "Let's not add dishonesty to the evening. This dinner, these games, Dr. Reynolds' presence, the purpose is transparent." The grandchildren looked confused, the other adults uncomfortable. Patricia stared at her plate, while Thomas watched me with quiet pride. "I'm not angry," I assured them, and I realized with some surprise that it's true. The hurt remained, but the indignation had been replaced by something stronger, an unshakable certainty in my own worth and capability. "I simply want to establish clarity. I am competent, I am financially secure, I am staying in my home, and most importantly, I will make my own decisions about my life, as I always have." I gathered my documents, placing them back in the folder. "Now, about those games. I'd be happy to participate, though perhaps something everyone can enjoy? Monopoly has always been a family favorite." The tension breaks slightly, replaced by nervous laughter and murmured agreement. As David went to find the Monopoly board, I caught his eye. "I've always been particularly good with property management," I reminded him quietly. "Some things never change." The Monopoly game became oddly symbolic. I systematically acquired properties, built houses and hotels, and eventually bankrupted both David and Melanie. My grandchildren found it hilarious. My children, less so. As Thomas drove me home afterward, the night air felt different somehow. Cleaner, fresher, filled with possibility. "You were magnificent," Thomas told me, glancing away from the road briefly. "The look on David's face when you handed out those documents." I smiled. "It wasn't about humiliating them. It was about clarity." "Still," Thomas said, "I'm pretty sure Dr. Reynolds is going to decline any future dinner invitations from them." We both laughed, a moment of lightness after weeks of tension. As we pulled into my driveway, I felt a sudden surge of gratitude for my youngest child, who sees me as I truly am. "Thank you," I said simply, "for standing by me through this." Thomas squeezed my hand. "It's what Dad would have done." After he left, I didn't immediately go to bed despite the late hour. Instead, I walked through my home with a fresh awareness of its significance, not just as a building filled with memories, but as a symbol of my autonomy. Each room represented choices I made, a life I built. The garden visible through the windows in moonlight was my creation, cultivated over decades. For the first time since the initial confrontation with my children, I slept soundly, without waking, to analyze conversations or plan defensive strategies. In standing firm, I had found a new kind of freedom, not just from their control, but from my own need for their approval. Over the next 2 weeks, I noticed a significant shift in my daily life. Without the constant monitoring calls from David and Melanie, my days opened up. The absence of their scrutiny created space for other activities and relationships. I resumed my regular lunches with friends from my banking days, discussions ranging from investment strategies to travel plans. These women, all accomplished professionals in their 60s and 70s, never treated me as diminished or fragile. With them, age was simply a number, not a definition. I rejoined my investment club, which I'd gradually stopped attending as David increasingly insisted on helping with my finances. At my first meeting back, the group welcomed my expertise on emerging market funds, a specialty from my advisory days. "We've missed your analysis, Edna," the club president told me. "No one quite has your eye for overlooked opportunities." I started, swimming 3 mornings a week at the community center, my body remembering rhythms from decades of athletic activity. The water supported my arthritic joints while allowing me to build strength. After each session, I joined a group of regulars, ranging from 30 to 80 years old, for coffee and conversation. At home, I began revisiting projects long deferred. I sorted through Arthur's academic papers, organizing them for donation, to the university archive. I redecorated the guest room that had remained untouched since the children moved out, transforming it into a reading nook with comfortable seating and perfect lighting. When Thomas called to check in, I shared these activities with enthusiasm. When Selena visited, we sat in the newly renovated space, planning a weekend trip to a nearby lake district. "I can't remember seeing you this energized," Selena observed. I considered this. I think I've been living defensively for years without realizing it, always anticipating the next criticism or suggestion that I couldn't manage something. And now? Now I'm just living, I said simply, making choices without justifying them to anyone. 3 weeks after the family dinner, I received an unexpected email from Patricia, David's wife. It was an invitation to lunch, just the two of us, at a small cafe downtown. Curious, I accepted. When I arrived, Patricia was already seated, nervously shredding a napkin. "Thank you for coming," Patricia said after we ordered. "I wasn't sure you would." "Why wouldn't I?" I asked. Patricia looked down. "After everything with David and Melanie, I wouldn't blame you for avoiding all of us. You're not responsible for their actions," I said gently. "Though I noticed your discomfort during some of their interventions." "I tried to say something," Patricia admitted. "It didn't go well. David was convinced he was doing the right thing. Still is, honestly." "And you?" I asked. Patricia met my eyes directly. "I think they were wrong. And watching you at that dinner, so composed, so clearly capable, it made me think about my own future." She hesitated, then continued. "I'm 51. In 20 years I'll be your age. The thought that my children might decide to manage my life without my consent, it terrifies me." "It should," I agreed. "Loss of autonomy is a profound violation." We talked for nearly 2 hours, the conversation flowing beyond family dynamics, to Patricia's own deferred dreams of going back to school, her concerns about retirement planning, her questions about navigating healthcare as a senior woman. "I've always admired you," Patricia confessed as we prepared to leave. "Your independence, your confidence. I've just never told you." "It's not too late to start," I said with a smile. "For the admiration or for your dreams?" As we parted, Patricia hugged me, a genuine embrace rather than the perfunctory greeting we'd shared for years. "I've asked the kids to call you more often. They miss their grandmother." The lunch with Patricia created an unexpected bridge between me and at least part of my family. The grandchildren began calling more regularly without prompting from their parents. Thomas visited every other weekend, sometimes bringing his partner along. David and Melanie maintained a strained distance, though the aggressive campaign to control my life seemed to have ceased. Occasionally, they sent tentative texts about practical matters or forwarded photos of the grandchildren. I responded politely, but didn't initiate contact. I was no longer angry, just protective of the freedom I'd reclaimed. The space between us felt necessary rather than punitive, room for everyone to adjust to the new reality. One sunny morning, I sat in my garden with my calendar open, planning the coming months. I had added a watercolor class on Thursdays, a volunteer position at the library's financial literacy program on Mondays, and tentative dates for a 2-week tour of the Pacific Northwest with Selena in the fall. I was halfway through booking flights when I realized I hadn't checked these plans with anyone. No explanations needed, no defensive arguments prepared for why I should be allowed to travel. The decision was entirely mine. I completed the booking, then sat back in my garden chair, face tilted toward the sun. The roses I'd tended for decades bloomed around me, their fragrance sweet in the morning air. A sense of profound contentment washed over me, the simple, powerful freedom of self-determination. For the first time in years, I was answerable only to myself. It tasted like victory. My reverie was interrupted by the ringing phone. I considered letting it go to voicemail but checked the caller ID. It was Thomas. "Mom." His voice was tight with concern when I answered. "Don't panic, but I'm at the hospital. With Melanie." My garden chair suddenly felt unsteady beneath me. "What happened?" "Car accident. She was hit at an intersection. She's stable but has a broken leg, cracked ribs, and a concussion. They're keeping her overnight for observation." "I'll be right there," I said, already moving toward the house. "There's more," Thomas continued. "Don's out of town for work. He's trying to get a flight back, but it won't be until tomorrow. Someone needs to watch Lizzie." Lizzie, Melanie's 14-year-old daughter, was likely home alone, probably frightened for her mother. "I'll pick her up on my way," I said without hesitation. As I gathered my purse and keys, I paused briefly, struck by the irony. Just as I'd found my independence, circumstances were pulling me back into a caretaking role. But this time, I was choosing it freely, not out of obligation, but out of love. The difference I realized as I started my car was in the agency. This wasn't about control or manipulation. It was about families supporting each other when truly needed. And perhaps in this crisis, there might be opportunity for healing, for understanding, for rebuilding what had been broken. I took a deep breath and drove toward my granddaughter's house, prepared for whatever might come next. At the hospital, I found Melanie pale against starched sheets, her leg elevated and encased in a temporary cast. Her face brightened with relief when Lizzie and I entered, then clouded with something like shame. "You didn't have to come," she murmured. "Of course I did," I said simply. "You're my daughter." Lizzie rushed to her mother's side while I stepped into the hallway to speak with the doctor. The injuries weren't life-threatening, but recovery would be substantial. 6 weeks minimum for the leg, restrictions due to the ribs, follow-up appointments for the concussion. "She'll need significant assistance at home," the doctor explained. "Stairs will be particularly challenging. Is there someone who can stay with her?" "Yes," I said firmly. She'll have help. Back in the room, the unspoken question hung in the air after Lizzie stepped out to find a vending machine. Melanie finally voiced it, her tone careful. "Mom, I know things have been difficult between us, but I can't manage alone, especially with Dawn traveling so much this month. Could you possibly—" "I'll stay with you until you're back on your feet," I assured her. "We'll work out the details tomorrow." Relief washed over Melanie's face, followed quickly by another emotion I couldn't quite identify. Gratitude mingled with something deeper, more complex. The next day found me packing an overnight bag while on the phone with Selena. "She actually asked for your help?" Selena sounded incredulous. "After everything?" "She did," I confirmed, though desperation probably played a role. "And you're really going to stay at her house? Take care of her after how she treated you?" I considered this as I folded a sweater. "She's my daughter, Selena, regardless of our disagreements." "That's very generous of you," Selena said, sounding unconvinced. "But what if this is another manipulation? A way to get you under their control again?" It was a legitimate concern, one I had considered during a sleepless night. "I don't think so. This crisis is real. Besides," I added with a touch of wry humor, "I'll still own their mortgages from Melanie's guest room." Moving into Melanie's house created an immediate role reversal. Suddenly, I was the caregiver rather than the one being managed. I helped Melanie navigate to the bathroom with her walker, managed her medication schedule, prepared meals, and drove Lizzie to school and activities. The physical demands were considerable, but I found myself more than capable. My swimming had kept me strong, and my organizational skills made coordinating Melanie's care, household management, and Lizzie's schedule relatively straightforward. What's more challenging was the shift in our interpersonal dynamic. Melanie, accustomed to seeing herself as the competent one helping her elderly mother, struggled with her new dependence. I, wary after months of conflict, maintained careful boundaries while providing necessary care. Conversations were initially limited to practical matters: medication timing, physical therapy exercises, meal preferences. But as days passed, the enforced proximity began to thaw the ice between us. A week into my stay, David arrived for dinner, bringing takeout and an agenda. After Melanie was settled in the living room and Lizzie retreated to her bedroom to study, he cornered me in the kitchen. "You've been amazing with Melanie," he began, his tone carefully calibrated. "We all appreciate it so much." I continued loading the dishwasher. "She's family." "Exactly," David seized on this. "Family takes care of family, which is why I've been thinking. This situation really highlights what we were trying to explain before." I closed the dishwasher and turned to face him. "How so?" "Well, you're managing wonderfully now," he said. "But what happens when you're the one who falls? When you're the one with a broken leg or worse? You live alone. There'd be no one there to help immediately." "Ah," I thought. "Here it comes. This experience proves our point," David continued earnestly. "Having support systems in place before emergencies happen is just common sense. Melanie was lucky. Her accident could have been so much worse. But at least she has family nearby." "I have family nearby too," I pointed out. "And friends, and neighbors." David waved this away. "It's not the same as having professional care available 24/7. Which brings me back to Evergreen Pines. I spoke with them yesterday. They're still holding your spot." The audacity was almost impressive. Using Melanie's accident and my compassionate response as leverage to resurrect their original plan took a certain kind of determination. "David," I said calmly, "I understand your concern, but my position hasn't changed. But surely this experience has shown you—" "It's shown me I'm more than capable of providing intensive care for someone with significant injuries," I interrupted. "At 72, I'm managing a household, coordinating medical care, and supporting a teenager simultaneously. Does that sound like someone who needs to be in assisted living? David flushed. That's not fair. This is temporary. Long-term is different. You're right, which is why this conversation is premature by at least 15 years, I said firmly. Now, let's bring Melanie her dinner before it gets cold. Later that night, after David left and Lizzie went to bed, I brought Melanie her evening medication and a cup of tea. I found her quietly crying. What's wrong? Are you in pain? I asked, setting down the tea. Melanie shook her head, wiping tears awkwardly with her uninjured arm. I heard you and David in the kitchen. I sat carefully on the edge of the sofa. I'm sorry, we should have been more discreet. No, that's not... Melanie took a shuddering breath. I'm embarrassed and ashamed. Of what? Of how we treated you. And then here you are, taking care of me without hesitation. She gestured to the pill organizer, the neatly arranged pillows, the carefully positioned water glass. You've thought of everything. You're so capable and kind, even after everything we did. I handed her a tissue. That's what mothers do. Not all mothers, Melanie said quietly. I'm not sure I would be this gracious if Lizzie treated me the way I treated you. It was the first genuine acknowledgement of our conflict, the first indication that Melanie saw the situation from my perspective. Not a strategic apology like before, but a moment of real self-reflection. I've been thinking a lot this week, Melanie continued, about aging, about control, about how terrifying it is to be dependent on others. I nodded, understanding dawning. It's frightening to need help. Yes, Melanie whispered. And I think maybe our push to move you to Evergreen wasn't really about your needs at all. It was about our discomfort with facing your mortality, and ultimately, our own. The bro. Honesty hung between us, fragile but real, a first tentative step toward genuine understanding. As I continued caring for Melanie over the next 2 weeks, I became aware that news of our situation was circulating through our interconnected social circles. Each visitor to Melanie's home witnessed the role reversal firsthand, me, the elderly mother, competently managing my middle-aged daughter's care. Don, Melanie's husband, returned from his business trip and was visibly impressed by my efficient organization of medications, appointments, and household routines. You've thought of everything, he commented, examining the detailed recovery schedule I'd created. I'm not sure we could have managed without you. I overheard Melanie's friends from the neighborhood bringing casseroles and staying for coffee, observing my vitality with surprise. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen preparing tea when I heard Melanie's friend Trisha whispering in the living room. Your mom is amazing, Trisha said. My mother is 5 years younger and can barely manage her own groceries, let alone run someone else's household. I know, Melanie replied quietly. We've underestimated her for years. When I finally returned to my regular activities at the community center, I found that perceptions had subtly shifted. Selena told me she'd fielded numerous questions about my absence. I told them you were caring for your daughter after an accident, Selena explained with noticeable pride. The same daughter who thought you needed to be in assisted living. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. By the time I resumed my normal routine, people who might have viewed me through the lens of my age now seemed to see my capabilities first. 3 weeks into Melanie's recovery, I attended my monthly neighborhood association meeting. I'd been treasurer for 5 years, a role David had recently suggested I might find challenging to continue. I arrived to unexpected applause. Here's our superwoman, called out Arthur Daniels, the association president. Caring for her daughter and still making time for community business, Mrs. Reynolds, a retired nurse in her 80s, squeezed my hand. We've been hearing about your excellent care of Melanie. Not surprised in the least. You've always been the competent one. Throughout the meeting, I noticed a marked difference. in how people addressed me. Questions about financial matters came directly to me rather than being directed to younger members. When I spoke, people listened attentively, without the patronizing smiles I'd grown accustomed to in recent years. Later, during refreshments, several members approached me privately. "My son's been pushing me to sell my house," confided Margaret Weber, a widow in her late 70s. "Says it's too much for me to handle. After hearing what you did, I finally told him no." "My daughter keeps helping with my finances," shared Frank Cooper, a retired accountant. "Taking over bit by bit. How did you handle that situation with your kids?" I found myself becoming an informal advisor to my peers, many of whom faced similar pressures from well-meaning but controlling adult children. I was careful not to demonize David and Melanie, focusing instead on practical strategies for maintaining independence while addressing legitimate concerns about aging. "The key is documentation," I explained to a small group gathered around me. "Regular medical checkups, cognitive assessments, well-organized financial records. Leave no room for assumptions about your capabilities." The conversations at the neighborhood meeting sparked something unexpected, a small movement among the senior community. Inspired by my story, others began asserting boundaries with their adult children. Margaret Weber enrolled in a home maintenance class specifically for seniors, addressing her son's concerns about her ability to maintain her property. Frank Cooper consulted with my attorney, Tricia, about creating clear financial directives that allowed transparency without surrendering control. The community center added a new workshop, Aging with Dignity, Maintaining Independence while Accepting Support. They asked me to be a guest speaker, sharing my experiences and strategies. The first session filled up immediately, primarily with people in their 60s and 70s concerned about future conversations with their children. Even Dr. Reynolds, who had been invited to David's dinner to evaluate me, approached me after a university function. "I owe you an apology," he said frankly. "I allowed myself to be put in an inappropriate position regarding your cognitive assessment. Your handling of the situation was exemplary." I knew the community's changed perception would inevitably filter back to David and Melanie. At a community picnic, I noticed David overhearing two men his age discussing retirement planning. "You should talk to Edna Matthews," one suggested to the other. "She gave my parents excellent advice on managing their portfolio through retirement." "Isn't she the one whose kids tried to put her in a home?" the second man asked. David walked away quickly, face burning. Later that week, he stopped by Melanie's house while I was there helping with physical therapy exercises. His demeanor was noticeably different, less authoritative, more hesitant. "Ran into Richard Solomon at the gym," he told me. "He mentioned you're helping him with his mother's estate planning?" "Just some informal advice," I confirmed. "His mother was one of my banking clients years ago." David nodded slowly, a new realization visibly dawning. I could see it in his eyes, the recognition that I wasn't just his mother. I was a community member with my own network, reputation, and sphere of influence. People he knew and respected, sought my expertise and valued my judgment. "I never really thought about how many people rely on you," he admitted. "I've always been more than just your mother, David," I said gently. "That's something I needed you to see." 6 weeks after Melanie's accident, her cast came off. By then, I had gradually transitioned back to my own home, though I still came over regularly to help with physical therapy and household tasks. On this milestone day, we went out for a celebratory lunch afterward, Melanie, Dawn, Lizzie, and myself. As we were seated at the restaurant, Melanie noticed me taking out reading glasses for the menu. "Mom, you got new glasses. And your hair? It's different." I touched my newly styled silver bob. "Yes, just last week. Selena recommended her stylist." Looking more closely, I could see Melanie taking in other subtle changes. My new watch with a fitness tracker, a stylish blouse I'd purchased recently, the slightly more defined muscle tone in my arms from consistent swimming. I looked more vibrant, more present in my own body than I had been in years. "You look wonderful," Melanie said, genuinely appreciative. Really? Rejuvenated. I feel rejuvenated, I acknowledged. Amazing what happens when you're busy living your life instead of defending it. Throughout lunch, I mentioned my expanded activities, the swimming, now supplemented with a gentle strength training class, the financial literacy program at the library that had grown from one session to a regular series, weekend trips with Selena to nearby towns we'd never explored before. Next month, we're taking a pottery class, I mentioned. I've always wanted to try working with clay. Lizzie, who had been quiet, suddenly interjected. Grandma, you're doing way more stuff than my friends' grandmothers. They're always complaining their grandparents never want to try anything new. I smiled at my granddaughter. It's never too late to start something new, Lizzie. Remember that. The following Sunday, Thomas hosted a family dinner at his home. For the first time in months, all three of my children were together along with their families. Thomas had made this happen deliberately, sensing the time was right for a more complete family reconciliation. The atmosphere was initially tentative, especially between David and me, as we'd had the least contact during Melanie's recovery. But as the evening progressed, the tension gradually eased. The grandchildren's energy helped, creating natural points of connection and shared laughter. During dessert, Thomas raised his glass in a toast. To Mom, who has shown us all what strength really looks like. Conversation flowed to my recent activities and achievements. Thomas mentioned my upcoming speaking engagement at a senior advocacy conference. Melanie shared how efficiently I had managed her recovery process. Even David, after initial reticence, acknowledged the positive feedback he'd heard about my financial workshops. Mr. Harrington at the bank told me your session on retirement planning was the most practical he's attended, he admitted. Said you explained complex concepts better than their professional advisors. What was notably absent from the conversation was any mention of evergreen pines, power of attorney documents, or concerns about my ability to live independently. Instead, the family discussed my plans, the upcoming trip with Selena, the garden renovation I was considering, the investment strategy I was developing for a new market opportunity. When the grandchildren left the table to play video games, David finally addressed the elephant in the room. I've been thinking a lot about our disagreement, Mom. I think I approached things badly. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was an acknowledgement. I accepted it with a nod. We all want what's best for those we love, David. Sometimes we just define best differently. Month later, I received an unexpected call from my former employer, First National Bank. The Director of Community Relations explained that they were establishing a financial literacy foundation aimed at helping seniors maintain financial independence. They wanted me to serve on the advisory board. Your combination of professional expertise and personal experience makes you uniquely qualified, the director explained. We need voices like yours guiding this initiative. The position came with a stipend, quarterly meetings, and the opportunity to shape educational programs that would be implemented nationwide. It was a role that acknowledged both my professional background and my recent advocacy work. When I shared this news with my children during our now regular Sunday phone calls, their reactions revealed how completely perceptions had shifted. That's perfect for you, Mom, Thomas said enthusiastically. Will you have time with all your other activities? Melanie asked, a question that assumed capability rather than limitation. Most tellingly, David responded with professional respect. They're lucky to have you. Your experience will be invaluable to their program development. Later that week, I met with the bank executives to discuss the role. As I walked into the familiar building where I spent much of my career, I was greeted with handshakes and collegial respect, not the patronizing deference often shown to elderly visitors. The meeting room was filled with professionals in their 40s and 50s, all there to hear my thoughts on program development. As I presented my ideas about creating financial education specifically tailored to seniors' needs, I realized I'd come full circle. Once again, I was the expert in the room, my gray hair now a symbol of valuable experience rather than diminished capacity. When I returned home, I called Selena. "You know what the best part was?" I said. "No one asked if I needed help understanding the paperwork or suggested I bring someone along to the meeting. They just assumed I was competent." "As they should," Selena replied. "The only ones who ever doubted that were the people who should have known better." While my life was flourishing, I learned through various channels that David and Melanie were facing unexpected professional consequences stemming from their actions toward me. Patricia mentioned during one of our now regular lunch dates that David had been called into his boss's office. Richard Townsend, the CEO of the financial services firm where David worked as a senior marketing executive, had known me professionally for decades. "David was mortified," Patricia confided. "Apparently, some clients who know you through your financial literacy workshops expressed concerns about how he handled the situation with you." "What happened?" I asked, surprised that my personal affairs had spilled into David's professional life. The Anderson account, a major client David had been cultivating for months, requested a different representative. They specifically mentioned hearing about his attempts to gain power of attorney and move you to assisted living against your will. Patricia stirred her coffee thoughtfully. Richard told him that it raised concerns about the firm's overall attitude toward elderly clients. I felt a pang of sympathy for David despite everything. That wasn't my intention. "I know," Patricia assured me. "But actions have consequences. The promotion he'd been expecting is now explicitly on hold, pending what Richard called demonstrated growth in understanding client autonomy concerns." Melanie, too, was experiencing professional repercussions. During one of my visits to help with her physical therapy, she mentioned a concerning trend in her real estate business. "I've had 3 senior clients cancel appointments this month," she said, frustration evident in her voice. "Mrs. Holloway finally admitted that there was talk at the garden club about my approach to your housing situation. She said it made several of them uncomfortable to work with an agent who might be judging whether they should be in a different type of facility." I nodded, understanding the delicate ecosystem of reputation in a small community. "People talk. I never thought our private family decisions would affect my business," Melanie said ruefully. "But I guess when you specialize in helping seniors downsize, how you treat your own mother becomes relevant." Both David and Melanie faced another consequence they hadn't anticipated: the mortgage situation. While I hadn't taken any punitive action regarding their mortgages, I knew from Thomas that the very knowledge that I held this power had created a subtle but persistent anxiety for them. David had apparently met with his financial advisor to discuss refinancing options, hoping to extricate himself from my financial influence. But with current rates, he'd be looking at an additional $600 monthly, plus substantial closing costs. With his promotion delayed and his son's college tuition increasing, taking on higher payments made little financial sense. Melanie faced a similar dilemma. With her real estate business experiencing a downturn and the medical bills from her accident still arriving, refinancing wasn't practical. They were both effectively trapped in a financial arrangement that served as a daily reminder of their attempted power grab and its backfiring. Beyond professional and financial consequences, I noticed that David and Melanie were experiencing subtle social repercussions. At a neighborhood barbecue I attended with Thomas, I observed several of my friends from the community center watching David with evaluating eyes. When he approached them with his usual charm, their responses were polite but measured. "Your mother's presentation on retirement planning was excellent," one said pointedly. "She has such clarity about making independent choices." Similarly, at a school function for Lizzie that I attended with Melanie, I noticed the changed dynamics with other parents who also knew me through various community connections. There was a protective quality to how they spoke about me, a subtle emphasis on my capabilities and contributions. "Your mother is helping my father reorganize his finances after my mother passed," one father mentioned to Melanie. "He says she's the first person who's talked to him like he's still competent to make his own decisions." I hadn't sought these consequences for my children. In fact, part of me was uncomfortable with how the community had rendered its judgment on their behavior. But I also recognized that this was natural accountability, not orchestrated revenge. Their actions had ripple effects they hadn't anticipated, just as my stand for independence had created unexpected positive ripples through the senior community. What struck me most was watching David and Melanie gradually come to terms with how their actions were perceived by others. The discomfort they felt wasn't just from external judgment, but seemed to be from their own emerging recognition that their behavior had been fundamentally disrespectful. I could see it in their eyes during family gatherings, a growing self-awareness that might eventually lead to genuine change rather than just strategic reconciliation. As their mother, I took no pleasure in their professional difficulties. But, as a woman who had fought for her autonomy, I recognized that these natural consequences might ultimately teach them more than any words of mine ever could. 8 months after the initial confrontation about Evergreen Pines, I insisted on hosting Thanksgiving at my home despite offers from my children to hold it elsewhere. I wanted them to see me in my element, confident, capable, in control of my domain. When my family arrived, they found the house transformed. I had completed several renovation projects, updated lighting, a modernized kitchen, a redesigned garden visible through the dining room windows. Most significantly, I'd created a first-floor guest suite by converting Arthur's old office. "Just practical improvements," I explained as I gave David a tour. "Single-level living space for when I have overnight guests. Or someday, if needed. For myself." I watched as David took in the thoughtful modifications. Elegant grab bars disguised as decorative fixtures, wider doorways, a curbless shower, all implemented with such style that they enhanced rather than institutionalized the space. "You've planned for everything," he said quietly. "That's what financial advisors do, David. We plan ahead." During dinner, the conversation flowed more easily than I had expected. The grandchildren shared school updates. Thomas discussed an upcoming exhibition of his students' work, and I talked about my advisory board position and upcoming travel plans. As we were serving dessert, David set down his fork and cleared his throat. "I'd like to say something," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant. "Mom, I've been doing a lot of thinking these past months about how we approached your situation." The table quieted as everyone turned toward him. "I was wrong," he said. Simply, we were wrong. Not just in how we went about it, but in our fundamental assumptions about what you needed. The admission hung in the air for a moment before David continued. "I've been meeting with a therapist to understand why I acted as I did. It wasn't really about you at all." He looked down at his plate. "It was about my own fear of aging, of losing control, and maybe about wanting to feel important, like I was taking care of you the way you always took care of us." Melanie reached over to squeeze her brother's hand, then added her own perspective. "For me, it was partly about convenience," she admitted. "Having you in a facility with built-in care meant I wouldn't have to feel guilty about not visiting enough or helping enough." She met my eyes directly. "I convinced myself it was for your benefit, but it was really for mine." The honesty was startling after months of tension and careful conversation. Even more surprising was the lack of accusation I felt. Where once I might have felt vindicated or triumphant, I now felt only understanding. "Fear makes us do strange things," I said, gently. "Especially fear for those we love, or fear of what their aging means for our own future." After dinner, while the others helped with cleanup, David found me in the living room, looking through an old photo album. "You know what I really regret?" he said, sitting beside me. not asking what you wanted. Not once in all our planning did we simply ask what would make you happy. What would you like to know now? I asked. David considered this. What do you want for your future, Mom? Not what we think you should want, but what you actually want. To live on my own terms, for as long as possible, I answered without hesitation. To be seen as the person I am, not just as someone's elderly mother. To have your support without your control. David nodded slowly. I think I finally understand the difference. As he helped me put away the photo albums, he added, I've been meaning to ask, those mortgages. Do you still own them? I smiled. Yes, I do. Does that bother you? David considered this honestly. It did. But now I see it differently. It's actually reassuring to know someone with your financial expertise is handling them. It was a small moment, but a significant one. The first acknowledgement that my expertise remained valuable, that my age hadn't diminished my capabilities but enhanced them through experience. Happy Thanksgiving, Mom, he said simply. Happy Thanksgiving. David, I replied, the words carrying the weight of genuine reconciliation. On a crisp winter morning 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, I opened my door to find Mr. Hamilton, the administrator from Evergreen Pines, standing on my porch with a portfolio, tucked under his arm. Mrs. Matthews, he greeted me warmly. I hope I'm not intruding. Your son David suggested I stop by to discuss some options with you. My expression cooled instantly. After the apparent breakthrough at Thanksgiving, this felt like a betrayal. I invited him in nonetheless, my hospitality overriding my irritation in my living room. Mr. Hamilton opened his portfolio to reveal floor plans and brochures. David mentioned you might be interested in our new independent living cottages. They're quite different from our assisted living facilities. Completely private. Homes with optional services. Before I could respond, my doorbell rang again. It was David, looking somewhat anxious. I see Mr. Hamilton made it, he said, stepping inside. Mom, before you say anything, this isn't what you think. I crossed my arms. It appears to be exactly what I think. Another attempt to move me out of my home. Actually, Mr. Hamilton interjects, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. David asked me to show you our cottage plans as a reference for your own renovation projects, not as a sales pitch. I looked at David questioningly. I thought they might have some design ideas you could incorporate here, David explained. Accessibility features that don't look institutional. After seeing your guest suite renovation, I realized you were serious about aging in place in this home. Once Mr. Hamilton left, David and I sat at my kitchen table, the facility brochures, pushed aside. I owe you an explanation, David began, and a genuine apology. I'm listening, I said, my guard still partly raised. After Thanksgiving, I did a lot of thinking about how badly I handled everything. I realized I never actually asked what you wanted. I just decided what was best for you. He took a deep breath. Then last week, my financial advisor started suggesting college funds for my kids that would require me to make all the decisions without their input. Something clicked. I suddenly understood how it felt to have someone else planning your life without consulting you. I felt my expression soften. It's a natural instinct to want to protect those we love. But there's protecting, and then there's controlling, David acknowledged. I crossed that line. He looked around my kitchen, the home he grew up in, the space I had maintained impeccably for decades. You belong here, Mom. You've made that clear, and I finally hear you. This visit today wasn't about Evergreen Pines. It was about me showing you that I respect your decision to stay here and want to support modifications that make that possible. Our conversation shifted to practical matters, my renovation plans, aging-in-place designs, and the financial considerations of adapting my home for the long term. I've been researching contractors who specialize in these modifications, David offered. If you'd like, I could share their information. No pressure, just resources. I'd appreciate that, I said, the last of my defensiveness melting away. As we discussed options, David hesitated, then brought up the subject we'd been circling around. About the mortgages, Mom. I understand now why you felt you needed that leverage. If you're willing, I'd like to refinance. Not because I mind you holding it, but because I want to prove you don't need financial power to ensure my respect. Studied my son, seeing genuine understanding in his eyes for the first time in this long journey. That won't be necessary, I said finally. I've had Trisha draw up papers to transfer both mortgages back to the original lenders. David looked surprised. You're giving up that security? I don't need it anymore, I said with quiet confidence. Not because I trust you won't try to control my life again, though I do believe you've learned from this, but because I've proven to myself that I can stand firm regardless. The mortgages were never really about power over you. They were about reminding myself of my own capability. In this moment, our final confrontation transformed into something else entirely. Not a power struggle, but a mutual recognition of boundaries, respect, and the complex dynamics between parents and adult children as both navigate the challenges of aging. The conversation with David was a turning point, but I still needed to have a similar dialogue with Melanie. That opportunity came a week later, when she invited me to lunch. Is this how it felt? She asked after we ordered. When David and I were making decisions about your life without consulting you? I was caught off guard by the directness of her question. What do you mean? During my recovery, she clarified, I found myself resenting how everyone kept deciding things for me. What I should eat, when I should rest, which exercises I should do. I was grateful for the help, but sometimes I felt invisible. Like my opinions about my own body didn't matter. Yes, I said simply. That's exactly how it felt. Melanie nodded thoughtfully. For me, it was just a few weeks. I can't imagine facing that prospect permanently. When you lose your agency, you lose a fundamental part of yourself, I explained. It's not about stubbornness or pride. It's about dignity. I'm sorry, Mom, Melanie said, reaching across the table to take my hand. Truly sorry. We thought we were doing what was best for you, but we never considered what was important to you. I appreciate that, I replied, squeezing her hand. And I understand your intentions were good even if your methods were misguided. As our food arrived, the conversation shifted to Melanie's recovery and her plans to return to work. But before we left the restaurant, she brought up one more thing. I heard from David that you're transferring the mortgages back, she said cautiously. Yes, I confirmed. It seems like the right thing to do now. Thank you, she said. Not for the financial aspect, but for the trust that represents. She hesitated before adding, I want you to know that I've learned my lesson. No more trying to manage your life or make decisions for you. I'm glad to hear it, I said, but I hope you won't retreat entirely. I still value your input and support, just as a daughter, not as a guardian. Later that week, Thomas joined me for dinner. He'd been my steadfast ally throughout this journey, and I wanted him to know about the resolution with his siblings. So peace has been declared? He asked with a small smile after I recounted my conversations with David and Melanie. More than that, I said. I think genuine understanding has been reached. Thomas looked relieved, but still concerned. And you're really giving up the mortgage leverage? Are you sure that's wise? I think it's necessary, I explained. As long as I hold their mortgages, there's an imbalance that prevents true healing. They'll always wonder if my kindness is genuine or strategic. And if they revert to their old patterns? Thomas asked, ever protective. Then I'll handle it, I said confidently. I've learned I'm stronger than I thought, and they've learned I'm not as pliable as they assumed. The next day, I met with Trisha to finalize the mortgage transfers. As she prepared the paperwork, she asked, "Are you absolutely certain about this, Edna? These mortgages gave you significant protection." "I'm certain," I said. "I no longer need financial leverage to ensure my independence. I've established that through my actions." "Well, you've certainly made an impression," Tricia said with a smile. "Not just on your family, but on the wider community. Do you know? I've had 6 new clients specifically reference your situation when seeking advice on maintaining autonomy while aging." "Really?" I hadn't realized my personal stand had resonated so widely. "You've become something of a folk hero among the senior set," Tricia chuckled. "The woman who bought her children's mortgages to teach them respect." I signed the transfer documents, feeling a sense of completion. The mortgages had served their purpose, not as long-term control, but as a dramatic demonstration that I was not to be underestimated. That evening, I called both David and Melanie to let them know the transfers were complete. Their responses were telling. "Thank you for your trust, Mom," David said. "I promise it's not misplaced." "We won't let you down again," Melanie assured me. I didn't need their promises or assurances. What mattered was that we had all grown through this conflict, my children toward greater respect for my autonomy, and me toward stronger self-advocacy. As I sat in my garden that night, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, I felt a profound sense of peace. The struggle hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. Through it, I had reclaimed not just my independence but also my identity, not as an aging parent to be managed, but as a whole person with wisdom, capabilities, and the right to self-determination. The fight for my autonomy had transformed into something unexpected, a catalyst for deeper understanding between generations. That, I realized, was perhaps the most valuable outcome of all. A year after the initial confrontation about Evergreen Pines, I hosted a garden party to celebrate my 73rd birthday. My backyard had been transformed with accessible pathways, raised garden beds that eliminated the need for kneeling, and a beautiful patio designed for entertaining. Friends from the community center, my investment club, and my financial literacy program mingled with family. Thomas helped with the grilling while his partner arranged flowers. Melanie, now fully recovered from her accident, assisted with serving. David and Patricia arrived with their teenagers and a cake from my favorite bakery. What struck me most was the natural, easy interaction between myself and my adult children. The tension that had characterized our relationship for so what struck me most was the natural, easy interaction between myself and my adult children. The tension that had characterized our relationship for so long had been replaced by something more balanced, mutual respect between adults rather than the strained dynamics of caretaking or control. When Selena raised a toast to another year of independence, everyone raised their glasses without hesitation or discomfort. The phrase no longer carried the weight of conflict. It was simply a celebration of my vibrant life. The new family dynamic had solidified into healthy patterns. David called regularly, but no longer framed his questions around monitoring my activities. Instead, he sought my advice on investment strategies for his children's education funds, acknowledging my expertise. Melanie had become more direct about needing help with Lizzie occasionally, asking clearly rather than assuming my availability. When I explained I had prior commitments, she accepted this without guilt-tripping or questioning, a small but significant shift. Thomas, who always had the healthiest relationship with me, now served as a bridge rather than a mediator. Family. Gatherings happened monthly, rotating between our homes, with me still insisting on hosting my share despite occasional gentle offers to take on the work. The mortgage documents, now transferred back to traditional lenders, had become a family inside joke, a reference point for how far we'd all come. "At least Mom doesn't own our houses anymore," David quipped during a recent dinner, earning genuine laughter all around. My advisory role with the Financial Literacy Foundation had expanded into a part-time position developing educational materials, specifically for seniors. My workshop series had been adopted by community centers across the state, helping other older adults maintain financial independence. Selena and I had taken 3 more trips, each more adventurous than the last. Photos of our coastal Maine expedition and Montana ranch stay adorned my walls alongside family pictures, representing the balanced life I'd created. Most satisfyingly, I had become an informal mentor to other seniors facing similar pressure from well-meaning but controlling children. At community gatherings, people sought my advice, drawn to my empathetic understanding and practical strategies for maintaining autonomy while acknowledging aging realities. The key is proactive planning, I often told them. When you demonstrate you've thought about your future needs, it's harder for others to claim you're being unrealistic about aging. The ripple effects of my stand for independence had extended beyond my immediate circle. David's financial services firm had implemented new protocols for client autonomy, ensuring elderly clients are fully included in all decisions. Melanie had developed a specialty in helping seniors modify their homes to age in place, rather than automatically suggesting downsizing. More subtly, the intergenerational relationships within our extended family had shifted. The grandchildren, having witnessed the conflict and resolution, had gained valuable perspectives on aging with dignity. I overheard my teenage grandson defending an elderly neighbor's right to live alone when friends questioned it. My grandma says competence doesn't expire with age, he stated firmly. Old doesn't mean incapable. On a quiet evening after my birthday celebration, I sat in my garden with Arthur's photograph beside me. The setting sun bathed everything in golden light as I reflected on the journey of the past year. We did well with them, Arthur, I said softly. Despite everything, they learned. They grew. I was under no illusions about the challenges that may lie ahead. Age brings inevitable changes, and someday I might indeed need more assistance. But the critical difference now was that any future decisions would be made with my full participation, my wishes respected, my dignity preserved. For now, I had created exactly what I wanted: the right to age on my own terms, supported but not controlled, loved but not diminished. My home remained my castle, my life remained my own, and my family relationships, though transformed through conflict, had emerged stronger for having found their proper boundaries. As twilight settled around me, I felt a profound contentment. The battle for my independence was never really about the mortgages or even about evergreen pines. It was about something far more fundamental: the right to write the final chapters of my own story, just as I had written all the previous ones. And that right, hard-won but now secure, felt like the most valuable asset of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.